Speaker, Mr. President, you have said so much of what I want to say that I'm going to ask for your patience in hearing things that you've already said before. I wish to thank the University of Guam and for the invitation to participate in this conference. There are many things to gain from experiences abroad in conducting diplomatic activities throughout the global community. But there is nothing more touching and nothing more rewarding, I think, than to come home to share those experiences. And I consider coming to Guam to talk about these things to be equivalent to coming home to share it. Because this is where it all started. It's not so many years that as a high school student in Chu, we coveted the adventures of some of our previous schoolmates who had graduated and gone on to the north to sign up at the College of Guam for their education. Speaker Hermes Castro, of political leadership in Chu, Alfred Popelli, religious leader in the Marshall Islands, Jolie Foy Foy, business leader in Saipan, many, many others were part of that adventuresome group of guys who sought and got Chamorro hospitality in Guam, and hence created the basis upon which foundation of higher education for Micronesians began. So this is home. In addition to which, I shared the other night that Dr. Underwood and I have known each other for at least 100 years. The science of climate change and its predictions are for island people no longer theoretical patterns that will occur at the turn of the century. They are, for most of us, the reality of today and the existential threat that concerns all. Many in this conference have discussed and addressed these issues for the past few days, and we will continue to discuss some of them, I understand, for the next two. But the pool of experience and knowledge gathered here by Dr. Underwood and his colleagues from the University of Alaska, is a signal, is a milestone in all our efforts to combine and to organize, to fight climate change, and to contribute to the solution of climate change, not just fall to its pressures. Warnings that we get from the global community should be taken seriously, but they should not be taken as final or irreversible. We have had to take seriously some events taking place in the islands, and some of us elders, I consider myself an elder now, do not recall ever seeing them before. We have expressed from Noah, one of our gurus in the prediction of climate change in the Pacific, who will attest to this, that for the first time, we can truly say that there is a Micronesia-wide drought mode in effect. We have had situations where Palau might have a little dry season, the marshes might have one, or portions of the states of Micronesia might have another. But nowhere in recent history, nowhere in history do I believe in recorded history has there been a situation where the entire region suffers from drought and the relief from that drought is yet to be confirmed. Although I'm getting some good words this morning that it is probably on the way. So, the multiple tidal inundations in 1 year has become a norm rather than exception, and salt intrusion into our water systems and our tidal patches have been documented in many jurisdictions. Ocean acidification and coral bleaching can be observed in most of the island groups, and people are already talking about climate change refugees and displacement. These are dire warnings again, but we have solutions in science and technology as well. It is not all doom and gloom. We have survived thousands of years, and we will prevail this time around as well. Next week in New York, I'm going to be traveling from Brum to New York to join our president. Fiji, Palau, the Marshall Islands, Tuvalu, Seychelles, Saint Lucia, Grenada, Barbados, and Jamaica may be the first nations in the world to deposit instruments of ratification of the Paris Agreement. Island, fragile states, but once again, in the front line of the climate change efforts of the world. While people call us vulnerable and fragile, we have been instrumental in cementing global commitments to address climate change and are set to pursue this course in cooperation with our development partners in the days, weeks, months, and years to come. This is a milestone to be celebrated, and the opportunities it offers should be pursued with vigor. In the waning hours of the Paris Conference on climate change, when it seemed that an agreement was beyond reach, a partnership of small islands and similar vulnerable states, along with some of our most powerful nations on earth, coalesced into what has become known as the High Ambition Coalition. This group helped navigate the agreement through severe turbulence, I must add, in the closing days of Paris, and ensured that vulnerable country leaders could return to their homes with the promise of a safe and secure future. We are proud of our role in that effort and look forward to continue our efforts to put words into action in the coming months. We realized early on that some of the very basic sine qua non of small nation countries to ensure participation in the agreement were facing stiff resistance in many countries and within various groups in the UNFCCC. Even in the Pacific, where a 1.5 degree goal had been pivotal, basic to our climate change efforts, was beginning to see loss of support. In the Pacific Islands Forum meeting in Papua New Guinea, our metropolitan partners told our leaders from the Pacific that 1.5 was totally impossible and would not find its way into the agreement in Paris at all. It's there. We realized also for a long period of time that our insistence that regular 5-year revisit to the commitments of the global emitters was a necessary part of that agreement. It was necessary because if we stuck to the science that was being predicted in Paris, we would have been forced to come home to tell our people, hey guys, we signed an agreement that says we'll be under the water in 50 years. We needed to have a window where countries can ratchet up their ambitions over the years at a regular time interval, something that would allow for science and technology, for political will and financing to catch up, to allow for the vulnerable countries to buy time, because displacement is not an option. In the end, we got that language into the agreement. I can list many other items that we drew in the sand itself. I can list many other items that we drew in the sand as final positions of the small island countries and their vulnerable partners. But we will leave that to the discussions for the next couple of days amongst the experts that we have gathered here. And we will be very happy to be part of that discussion as well, to share that experience. But the final conclusion one must draw is that small island countries should not accept that classification as meaning that they cannot participate fully and meaningfully in all that happens in the climate change in the world. And our presence in New York next week will be a testament to that. We will forever be grateful to the United States and its European allies for supporting our positions in the UNFCCC. This coming together of nations so diverse would not have happened without the personal intervention of partners we did not even know existed. In the end, even Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and Japan, which were sort of sitting there watching to see what was happening, came on board and marched with us into the final session of the COP in Paris. The rest is history, and we look forward very much to signing the agreement in New York next week. One of the most important points of agreement that emerged out of the long, sometimes very contentious discussions of the UNFCCC is that vulnerable countries should not be treated in the same old, quote, one-size-fits-all theory of the donor countries and the executing agencies and organs of the United Nations and regional organizations. Because of our unique vulnerabilities and our already fragile economic future, special attention needed to be focused on streamlining the processes to give more than a fighting chance for small island developing nations to access technology and finance, to sort of pre-qualify for technical assistance and capacity building, so that we would not find ourselves at the tail end of the long line of UN applicants for UN services. Most of the time, the three Micronesian freely associated states find themselves number 182, 183, and 184. We were successful in making sure that language was added to make that these countries should be able to get in front of the line and develop new classification, so that the old metrics that dictated how assistance is funneled to the countries that need it most have been modified because of the struggle of the small island states. The small island developing states and their similarly affected world partners have to deal with disadvantages that have become givens in dealing with small island countries. These economies of scale, long distances and scarce resources, energy and water issues, small populations, and scarce opportunities are always served as impediments to meaningful, sustainable development in small island states. Our most important resources have been listed in world markets as there for the exploitation and profits of the more powerful. This kind of thinking must change. We may be island natives, but we get it. We know what must be done, and we will form and sustain the necessary partnerships for our future to thrive. This conference is another major step to expand our outreach to global partners if we seize the opportunities that come with climate change. Partnering up with academic institutions, which already have the capacity to assist us in accessing technical and financial resources, is a beginning this conference can cherish and enhance. A priority here is the designation of UN-recognized, what I, again in quotes, implementing agencies to help coordinate applications, establish capabilities, execute programs, and very importantly, as I stressed with President Underwood, provide reports and evaluation of those programs. Absolutely necessary for the continuation of that funnel of support. The efforts at home must also continue. Just last week, we attended in Pohnpei an all-Micronesian shark sanctuary meeting that was held where all the Micronesian entities got to participate, share experience, and promote ideas for the future. As custodians of the world's largest sanctuary, we have something to offer the world that otherwise would not have been recognized as coming from small island, insignificant dots on the map in the middle of nowhere. We will continue to provide that leadership. We must also deal with pockets of inconsistencies which continue to hound our efforts to promote safe and sensible practice in the harvesting and management of our ocean resources. It makes no sense to be the world's largest shark sanctuary and yet tolerate the systematic poaching of our waters for this magnificent creature. It makes little sense to talk about fragile ecosystems in atolls, while at the same time licensing the indiscriminate, unregulated taking of sea cucumbers in Micronesian waters. We have to be more intense in our search for alternate energy and water, foundations without which our efforts to combat climate change will not succeed. You cannot separate the need for energy independence and sustainability from the threats of climate change. They are one and the same thing. The solution is built in. All we need to do is work it out. In 1939, 40,000 tons of copra were exported to Japan from the Marshall Islands. The highest level of production that we have reached since World War II is just under 7,000 tons a year. In the Japanese times, we moved this copra to Java for eventual shipment to Japan with small sail schooners, which provided no fossil track and didn't pollute anyone, and were at the discretion of the local leaders to move as they saw fit and as their needs dictated. We introduced these white elephant ships called field trip vessels after the war that now cost nearly $10,000 a day to operate and cannot be sustained regardless of how you do the math. We've got to learn from what we did before. We've got to revive our sailing skills and have a system that can work in the islands that does not need a drop of oil. Now, in fiscal year 2014, China received as export from the harbor at Magellan, the capital of the Marshall Islands, more than $1.5 billion worth of raw tuna. If only a small percentage of that value were added at the local scene through employment or through a more finished product, we would not have a need for compact funds to carry out our mandated, constitutionally mandated duties of health and education. We would not need that. What we need to do now is to exert all effort to make sure that the foundation to be able to deduce that value are laid: energy and water. And in this room are the wisest people to advise us in that endeavor. Many important resources remain untouched out there. And if we can begin the process of tapping these resources wisely and in partnership with our development partners, we can make a difference as small island countries, as small island sustainable states. There is a Green Climate Fund for which we have already developed a shortcut for small island states. The Chinese Fund for Development and other bilateral sources of technological and financial resources, such as the GIZ from Germany. The miracles of alternate energy are out there. Speaker very kindly mentioned our efforts in ocean thermal energy conversion. We think that it may be a little slow now because the price of oil is below $30 a barrel. But in time, we will still need to hydrogenize, make hydrogen our source of power for energy and water needs for all our communities. That can be done. The technology is already here. Again, partnership with the institutions that we have here present and tapping into the source is what we need to do. Solar and wind power and other clean energy resources are plentiful in our island areas. True, the initial investment may be a little higher, but that should be taken into account when we have said in previous remarks that the current metrics of determining eligibility for assistance or for loans or for grants should be modified to be more in line with the realities of climate change. Once we've done that, resources are all out there. It's for us to get at. The most important thing, I think, amongst us islanded communities here is that we can no longer be perceived as natives sitting under the coconut trees waiting for the coconuts to fall. Erase that. No. We cannot be forever condemned to, oh, those people never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. That must be erased as well. We have to unify, because a union of national leaders, of youth especially, our most wonderful star at the Paris conference was none other than Kathy Kitchener, who has appeared here before in conferences with the UG. She is a wonderful, talented young poet of the Marshall who can express these thoughts in ways that I can never dream of expressing. And she's coming here for the tourism conference in Brum later this year. Our youth groups, our NGOs, governments, both national and local, traditional leaderships, all of these must be brought together. This is our chore. Must be brought together, and support from this kind of group and union is our best bet for victory. Cling to the belief that we have gone through similar challenges in the past, and for thousands of years we have survived. Displacement and outmigration are not palatable options. We shall be resilient, and we shall prevail. Thank you very much.